Hey guys, welcome back. This is Mode Bespoke and I'm Atenas, and for today's tutorial we are going to be making a little duck blanket. Now this blanket is crocheted in Tunisian crochet and you will need a Tunisian hook. We're going to be using the knit stitch, the purl, and an ocean stitch. So let's get started. So let's start with a slip knot. So wrap your yarn around 2 fingers, insert your hook into the loop, and then you're just going to pull up a loop on your hook. So tighten the loop by pulling on these 2 threads at the bottom. There we go. And there's our slip knot. Sorry, a truck just drove by. Alright, we need to make a chain in multiples of 10 plus 2. That means depending on the width that you want, so however wide you want your blanket, count 10, 10, 10 until you reach that width, and at the very end you're going to add 2 additional stitches, alright? So you yarn over and pull through the loop on your hook for a chain. It's 1. Yarn over, pull through, yarn over, pull through, yarn over, pull through, until you get to the width that you want. Because I am just making a small sample to show you guys, I'm just going to crochet a quick chain of 22 stitches, and I'll see you again in a moment. Alright, so our chain is ready. Now we have to do our foundation row. So for this, we have to cast on. Now to cast on, you're going to go into the second stitch from your hook. So not this one, go into the second one, insert your hook, yarn over, and pull up a loop. So we get a little bit closer and we'll do it again. Insert your hook into the stitch, yarn over, and pull up a loop. You're going to do this for every stitch of the row. So once you have cast on 1 loop for every stitch of your chain, if you need to count them because you like to count, there's going to be, my chain is 22 stitches, so I'm going to have 23 loops on my hook because we already had one when we started the row. So like in all crochet, when you start your first row, you usually have to chain a specific number of stitches. When you Tunisian crochet, it's like you're working in, I guess, a single crochet, so we need to chain 1. So yarn over, and you're going to pull the loop through 1 loop on your hook. So yarn over and pull through 1. And now we're going to finish the rest of the row, which is called a return row or a return pass. So finish your return pass with yarn over and then pull through 2. So that's 1, 2. Let's do it again. Yarn over and pull through 2 loops. So here's 1 loop and here's the second loop, all right? So we pull through 1, 2. Yarn over and pull through 2. 1, 2. And we're going to do this until you have 1 loop left on your hook. Alright, so our foundation row is ready. So we cast on and then we did a return row, and this is what we end up with. This is our foundation row. So now for row number 1, we're going to work a knit stitch. So this is the look we're going for. In order to get this look, we need to look at our vertical stitches. So it's these little lines right here. So take a look at your vertical stitch. If you turn it to the side, you're going to see that it's made up of 2 loops. It's got the front loop and the back loop. You're going to insert your hook right in between both of those. So for this stitch, we do have to skip this very first stitch, and we're going to go into the second one. So go into the second vertical stitch and insert your hook behind that top loop. And now you're going to go straight through. So this will be a lot easier to see in our second row. So I'll show you this again. Then you're going to yarn over and pull up a loop. So you're going to cast on again, if you will. Alright, so let me see if you can see it better on this stitch. So here are 2 loops. So here's the front one. This one right here is the back one. Insert your hook in between both of those and all the way through the back. Yarn over and pull up a loop. Go in between those, yarn over, and pull up a loop. So do this until you get to the end of the row. Like I said, it's a little easier to see the next row, so I'll show you how to do this again, but let me just finish this row and we can move on. If you want to look at the written pattern, don't forget to visit the blog. There is a chart there as well for the duck, because you will need the chart in order to complete the little duck on this blanket. So it's a lot easier to do if you have that. Go check it out. It is on the blog. Like I said, it's free. Let me know what you think, and if you have any other suggestions for blankets you'd like to see or any other crochet project, let me know in the comment section below. Alright, so now that we're at the end of the row, we've got this vertical stitch, and then we have this mess right here. So we're going to make another, we're going to pull up another loop in that vertical stitch, and now right here, this stitch right there on the side, so you see this little knot? It's the stitch right above it. We need to make another stitch. This is going to keep our stitch count even. Alright, so if you don't do that, your work is going to start to lean in towards the inside and it's going to look a bit triangular. So we don't want to do that. So what we're going to do is insert our hook and we're going to pass it through both loops of this stitch. So here's the front loop and there's the back loop. So we've gone through both loops, yarn over, and pull up a stitch. Don't forget this last stitch. It's really easy to forget it when you're new to Tunisian crochet. So just pay close attention when you get to the end and you should be fine. Alright, so we need to do our chain one. So yarn over and pass through that first loop. And now let's complete the rest of the return pass the same way that we did the other one. So yarn over and pull through 2. Yarn over, pull through 2. Yarn over, pull through 2. And continue this way until you have one loop left on your hook. So here we are at the end. Alright, so this one's a lot easier to see. So skip this first loop, go into the second vertical stitch, and if you look, now you can clearly see both threads of the stitch. So you have the front one and the back one. Go in between both of those and insert your hook all the way to the back. And now just pull up a loop. Now go into the next stitch and pull up a loop. And that's all there's to it. That is the knit stitch. After you complete a few rows, your project is going to start to look like this. Something to remember is that you need to keep your tension even. So as you're working along, try not to change your tension too much. And I also recommend not using a really tight tension, because what you're going to notice is that these first stitches are going to be really loose. So by the time you get to the end, all of these stitches in the middle are going to be really tight, including this last stitch. So you're going to have a very narrow work on this side, and it's going to be very wide and loose on this other side. So use as loose a tension as you can, as you're comfortable with, and that way it'll help keep all of your stitching even. And then if you still have problems with your blanket being wider on one side than the other, when you get to the very end of the row, which I'll get here in just a minute, you're just going to loosen it up a little bit. So let me get to this last stitch and then I'll show you what I mean. Okay, so here we are at the end again. So we have this very last vertical stitch, which is the one I told you not to forget. It also becomes a lot easier to see here at the end. So it's, or as you move along, I guess, as you have more rows. There we go. So just make sure you go through both loops and then pull up a loop. Alright, so if you want this end to match this end, and you notice that these stitches are just really loose here, what you're going to do is just pull on your work a little bit, and that'll loosen this stitch up. So you'll do your chain one, and then complete your return pass. And that way, both sides of your work will be, well, you won't have one narrow side and one loose side. They'll be pretty even. So just keep making a few rows of this. On the pattern, I think I wrote on here that I did 10 rows. So I believe it is 10 rows before we get to the duck. Like I said, it is all written down, don't worry. So I'm just going to make a couple of rows just so you can see the stitching, and then we're going to move on to the duck. So I'll get that finished and I'll see you all again in a minute. Okay, so I did just a few more rows so you can see what's going to start to happen to your Tunisian work. So as you work along, you're going to notice that it's going to roll up. Don't worry, we'll take care of this a little further along in the video. I'll show you how. But this is common. It's just a curl that you get in your Tunisian stitching. It's very common, especially in the knit stitch, so it'll happen often unless you use a really large hook and really, really loose tension, but even then you'll still get a bit of a curl. So anyway, after I did a few rows, this is what it starts to look like. So you can see your knit stitch is coming along. It's looking really nice and neat. So now after you complete a few rows of this work, we can start working on the duck. So now for the duck, like I said, the chart is available on the blog. We're going to need to work, let me pull this up real quick. So here we go. So you're going to need to take a look at this, and this chart is worked from right to left. So we're going to start down here. So this is the row that you're on. These numbers are the stitches that you're going to be working, all right? So all this yellow is going to be the purl stitching. So you'll see this, this is just a picture. You'll see it on the chart itself. I have it labeled down here. So all these white stitches are knit stitches. These are all purl. So we're going to need, depending on where on your blanket you want to place the duck. I did 12 stitches on this side, so I left a total of 12 here on the side. So for all of my counts, I need to add 12 before I can start adding these. So for this first row, I need to add the 12, which are the number of stitches I left on this side. So it's 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. So I will be purling in stitch number 17. Because my work doesn't have that many stitches, it's just a small sample, I'm going to show you just how to read the chart, but we're just going to pretend here that I've already skipped 17 stitches. So I'm going to go with, let's see, 13, 14, 15, 16, and then, oh, stitch number 17. So we have all of these. And then for our next stitch, which is going to be the very first purl stitch, so I've given myself a little space here, you're going to start with a yarn over. So it's a reverse yarn over. Normally you yarn over this direction, but when you do a purl, you go the other direction. So your hook comes in behind your thread and you yarn over in front of your hook. Hold it down with your index finger, it makes it a lot easier. And then you're going to go into this stitch. This is the very next stitch, so this would be stitch number 17. Alright, so we go into the stitch, insert our hook, and then you're going to release your yarn and pull it in front of the stitch so that it crosses in front. And now you yarn over like you normally would. There we go. So just a yarn over, and you're going to pull it through this loop. And there's your purl. Let's do that again. You're going to do a reverse yarn over, hold it down with your index finger, insert your hook into the stitch, so the front top loop of the vertical stitch, and then you're going to release your yarn. Pull it so that it lays in front of your work, and then you yarn over and pull through one loop. There we go. So that's a purl stitch. We will do a few more, but let's see how many we need. So we're going to need 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 purl stitches. So I already have 2. So let's reverse yarn over, insert our hook into the stitch, so we'll pull up that, release our yarn, pull the yarn in front of the stitch, and then yarn over and pull through this loop. So now we have 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. So there we go. So here are 7 purl stitches, and now the rest of this row you just continue crocheting in knit stitch. So as you can see, the duck is only on one corner of the blanket, and the rest of it is all knit. So just keep working in knit stitch until you finish your row, do your return pass, and then I'll see you when we get back to this side. So we finished our return pass, and you just work a return pass like you normally did on these stitches. You do the same when you get to the purls. It doesn't change. It's worked exactly the same no matter what stitch in this pattern. That's not to say that it's always the same in Tunisian crochet. All right, so our first few stitches are a knit stitch. So I'll pull up these loops like I would a knit stitch loop. There you go. Here are our purl stitches, and now let's look at our diagram, or our chart, I should say. All right, so if you look at our chart, now we only need 1, 2, 3 knit stitches before we get to the purls. So and then here we have 1 purl, so to the right of our first or initial purl. So we're trying to make this bit more of a round look. So we're adding stitches to the right and to the left. So we're going to add a stitch here and we're going to add a stitch here. So to do that, we just count the number of stitches we need. So in our hypothetical example, I had 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, and I started on stitch number 17. For this row, we have 12, 13, 14, 15. On stitch number 16 is where I would start my first purl. So let me move this over. Let's zoom in. Okay, so I have all of these stitches. Here's my knit stitch, and here's my first purl. I need to make another purl on this side. So we just reverse yarn over and turn this knit stitch into a purl stitch. And that's it. And then we just purl all these other stitches till we get to the other side where we have to add another purl. So that's all there really is to reading the diagram. Whenever you see a knit stitch or a purl stitch, you just stitch what the diagram tells you to stitch. And it does get a lot easier. You may need a little bit of practice at first, but I promise it gets a lot easier and then it starts to make sense. So just give it a quick practice and then you'll be able to complete this pattern no problem. All right, so I did all of my purl stitches. So if you're going through, you can count the purls as you crochet them. I'm just doing a quick example, so I'm not counting them. But as you're working on them, just count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So I have 8 purls made. Now I need purl number 9. And here's my knit stitch. So I need to purl my 9th stitch. So, and there we go. Now the rest of this is all knit stitch. That's all there's to this. Once you get to the eye, just count your stitches. So do all of your knit stitches and then do your purl stitches, and then you're going to do 1 knit and then purl, purl, and then all knit. So you'll be able to see the eye a little bit. If you aren't comfortable doing that, that's okay. You can just do them all as purls. Nothing will happen. It'll be okay. It's just a little duck silhouette, so it doesn't have to be perfect. If you really want it to be super noticeable, you can even put a button. So you could just purl it all and then just put a little button on there and it'll be highly noticeable. So that's all there is to making the duck. Now when you get to the top row, this is all knit stitch. So once you finish the head, just continue with the knit stitch and the rest of your blanket will be entirely in knit stitch. Now, I do have a color change right here. If you don't want to switch colors, that's okay. Just work the whole pattern in one color and then you can switch colors here if you choose to. If you want to switch colors, let me finish this row real quick and I'll show you how to do that. All right, so if you're going to switch colors, finish your return pass. And we're going to switch color at the beginning of the row. So if you're making the blanket the same size as mine, I ran out of yarn about halfway through one of the rows, so you will have about that much yarn left over. So I just kept crocheting until I ran out of yarn, and once I got halfway here, that's where I ran out, and then I just pulled out these stitches and then just switched color. So if you want to do that, go for it. If you would rather count rows or something, let me know. I'll count these and let you know how many there were. All right, but to switch color, get your next color. So here's my skein. Leave a nice long tail end of yarn because we're going to weave this in later, and that way it'll help our it'll keep our work from unraveling. So leave a nice tail end and then just pull up a loop on your hook like so. Pull this loop through the loop on your hook. So pull the white loop through the blue loop like that. Now make sure you've tightened everything up, so pull on this blue thread. If it's not super tight, don't worry. You can tighten it up again in a moment. And I'm just going to let this tail end just drop right here. with your working yarn, just start pulling up loops like you would, or like you did at least with the blue part. So just insert your hook into the stitch and pull up a loop, and then go to the next one. That's it. It was really that easy. We just switched colors. Once you get to your return pass, complete the return pass, you'll be able to pull on all of these and make them a lot tighter. Make sure you do leave this long. It will help you later when you weave it in. Do the same thing when you cut this blue thread. So when you cut it, leave a nice long tail end, and then we'll weave all that in a little bit later in the video. I'll show you how to weave in ends if you've never done it before. So just go through, pull up the rest of your work, and I'll work on this a little bit, and then we can move on to the border. It's a little bit more labor intensive than the rest of this. So we'll get to the border here in just a moment. Just give me a minute to get there. So I worked a few more rows, and now you can see the curl. It's still there. For this particular project, don't worry about the curl. You don't need to block it unless you really want to take care of some of your edges. Like I just kind of worked through them here, and I didn't worry too much about it. But if you want to learn how to do any of the blocking for your Tunisian work and how to get rid of some of these spaces, let me know. I'll make a tutorial on that because there is a couple of things to cover on it. But as for the curl, I just kept working on my blanket. So I did all of the gray, all of the white, and then I just started working on the border. This border weighs it down enough so that it gets completely rid of the curl. So there's no curl left whatsoever on my work. Sorry if you see anything, it's because it's caught on my tripod on this side. But there's no curl, so I'm not going to show you how to get rid of that for this particular project. We need to do a bind off row before we start working on our border. So to do that, let me zoom in and let's get started here. The bind off row, what it does when you bind off is it gets rid of this big spacing here at the top, and it'll make for a nice clean border. So if you don't get rid of this, you're going to have a bit more of a space, and it's going to be very noticeable once you start your border. So take care of this first before you move on, otherwise you'll end up pulling your stitches and you're going to have to do it all over again. So for bind off, I'm just going to insert my hook like I'm working on a Tunisian stitch. So, or on the knit stitch, I should say. So insert your hook into your stitch, yarn over and pull up a loop. You'll have 2 loops on your hook, yarn over and pull through both. And that's a single crochet. So we're going to single crochet in this next stitch. So insert your hook into the stitch, yarn over and pull up a loop, and then yarn over and pull through both loops. And that's it. So make a single crochet in every stitch of the row, and I'll see you when we finish. Alright, so here we go. I finished the row. Here are all my single crochets. So now our work looks even here at the top and at the bottom, because our bind off row is going to match our chain row here at the base of our blanket. So now we have to start the half double crochet for our blanket. So our border, let me back up here a little bit. So you're going to start with a row of half double crochets, and you're going to work this all the way around the border. And then we're going to start with the ocean stitch. The ocean stitch is worked one side of your work first. So here's our blanket. So we're going to do one side of the blanket, then the other side, and then at the end you do the top and bottom. So it's not worked continuously around. So it's one side, other side, top, bottom, and our last row of half double crochets you do work all the way around. So let's get started with this. So if you're going to switch color to do a different color border, like I did for my blanket, once you get to this point, you're not going to have a whole lot of yarn left from the white skein or the last skein that you used. You should have about half of a row's worth of yarn left. So what you're going to do is just chain 1 and then cut a nice long tail end of thread. We're going to weave this in later, and that's it. You pull your hook out, you pull the thread out with it, and then we can start new. If you start new, all you're going to do, let me pull this up, because we're starting here on this top left side, is just insert your hook into the stitch, pull up a loop, and then just pull it up like you did when we switched colors, and then leave a nice long tail end of thread, and that's it. That's all you're going to do. So for this first stitch, yarn over and insert your hook into the stitch, and then yarn over and pull up a loop. You will have 3 loops on your hook. Now you just yarn over and pull through all 3. And that's a half double crochet. So let's go into the next stitch and make another one. Yarn over, insert your hook into the stitch so you can see the stitch here, and go through both sides of the stitch. Yarn over, pull up a loop. We have 3. Now yarn over and pull through all 3. And there we go. Let's zoom in a little. Yarn over, insert your hook into the stitch, yarn over, pull up a loop, and pull through all 3. So make a half double crochet in every stitch of your row. And then when we get to the corners, we're going to have to make 3 half double crochets in that same stitch. So I'm almost there. I didn't leave this very big so that we can keep working on it almost continuously. So here I'm close to the end. I've got, what, 2 stitches? This one, and then we're going to get to this corner stitch. So in the corner stitch, you're going to have your long tail end of yarn. Just move it out of your way. We'll weave that in later. What you're going to do is here in the corner stitch, you're going to make 3 half double crochets in that same stitch. So yarn over and insert your hook. If you see that there's this big old thread right here, this big old space, I don't like to use this one when I'm making the blanket. I just kind of go into the next available stitch because this one's really wide. So if you want to tighten it up, go for it, but I just kind of skip it and go into this very next stitch. So just somewhere in here to make my 3 half double crochets. It just has to be something that's a little bit further in, that has a little bit more support and can hold the 3 stitches without pulling the corner really wide. So here's 1, 2, all right, and 3. So we made 3 half double crochets in the corner stitch. And now you just keep working a half double crochet into the next stitch, and then into the next one, and so forth. So all the corners get 3 half double crochets, and all of the stitches along the edges just get the 1. So I'll keep working on this. That's what it's going to look like. I'll see you when I work my way all the way around. All right, so I made it all the way around. Here's my last half double crochet. Now we need to close the round. So we're going to go into this very first stitch. So it's the very first half double crochet that you made on that first corner. We're just going to insert our hook, pull up a loop, and then we're going to slip stitch. So we're going to pull this loop through this loop. And there we go. So we finished. So now we're going to start our row of ocean stitch. So the ocean stitch is, there we go. So you can see it's 3 little stitches. So it's this one right here, and then one long one in the middle, and then this one, little short one. So they kind of almost look like little flowers. So we're going to start by casting on. So go into the next stitch and just pull up a loop. And you're going to pull up a loop for every single one of the stitches of one side. So it's not all the way around. We're just going to work one side of the blanket first. So since I don't want to cut my thread, I'm just going to keep working here on the left side of my blanket and just pull up a stitch for every one of the stitches here of the row. So once you get to the round right here, to that little corner, we're going to pull up a loop, the first stitch of the corner, and then for the second one, so the middle stitch. And then just leave that third stitch. It's going to go here on this side, so that we've pulled up a loop for every one of these. Now here's where you're going to start to give your ocean stitch the look that it has. We're going to start with a chain 2. So yarn over, chain 1, and then yarn over, chain 2. Now our return pass is very, very different this time. You're going to yarn over and pull through 3. So you start your return pass with chain 2, and yarn over, pull through 4 loops. We have 1 loop, 2, 3, 4. Okay, now you chain 2. 1, 2, and these are just regular chains. You're not pulling through any of these loops, just a regular chain. And now we yarn over and pull through 4. So 1, 2, 3, 4. All right, now let's do the chains again. We're not using any of these loops. We're just going to chain. So yarn over and pull through the loop on your hook. So that's 1, 2. Yarn over, pull through 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Chain 2. 1, 2. Yarn over, pull through 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. And then chain 2. 1, 2. And then pull through this last loop. And there we go. So there's our first row. So now that we're here at the end, you see our little flowers here. So they're little ocean waves, I think. That's why it's called the ocean stitch. So we're going to work into these little chain spaces because these little, I'm going to call them flowers. I just think they look like flowers. So they overlap. So you're going to have these two and then there's one in the middle, and then these two and then one in the middle. So they kind of just go in between one another. So you see these little chain spaces. This is where you're going to make another little flower to go in between these. So it's no different here when you get to the edges. So we're just going to chain 1. And our first one, we're going to have the 2 chains that you made are 2 separate stitches. So we're going to go into that very first stitch. So it's kind of small. So just be very careful here. Go into that first stitch. So that, I guess it's the second chain you made, the very last chain you made out of your chain 2. Go into that stitch and pull up a loop. Now for the next stitch, you're going to go down here. So there's a stitch right there between this little vertical post and our flower. There's a stitch. Insert your hook through the stitch and pull through the 2 loops. There are 2 loops to that stitch. So it's really difficult to show it on the camera, but when you look at it, you'll see both loops. So just go through it and pull up a loop, and then just give it a little pull because you want this to be nice and long. And then go into that second chain. So it's the stitch right next to the flower you made in the previous row. Go into that stitch, go through both loops here, go both loops, and just pull up a loop. So there we go. It'll be a lot easier to see here in the next stitch. So we're going to skip the flower and go into this next one. So into the first chain, so the chain right after the flower, there's a stitch. Insert your hook into that stitch and pull up a loop. Insert your hook into the stitch that's between both flowers. So there's this little knot right there. Go into that one. Insert your hook, pull up a loop, and then once you pull up a loop, just kind of pull up to loosen it up. Now go into the last stitch, so the stitch to the right of your flower, this one. Insert your hook, see there are both loops, go through both, pull up a loop. There we go. Now let's go into this next chain space. Insert your hook into the stitch to the left of your flower, so immediately to the left. And pull up a loop. Insert your hook into the stitch between the flowers, so it's down here. It's not in the chain space, it's down here. Insert your hook, pull up a stitch. And then do the same here on the stitch that's to the right of the flower. Insert the hook, pull up a loop. And you're just going to keep doing this in every little chain space of the row. So I'll finish this last one. There we go. And then here at the end, So this very last one, we're going to make 2 stitches, okay? This one's pretty small. So we're going to go into this stitch right here, so the stitch next to our little flower, pull up a loop, and then we're going to go to the stitch below that, so this chain right down here, and pull up a loop. Okay, now this next row is going to be different than the previous return pass. In this one, you're going to yarn over and pull through both of these 2 loops you pulled through the chain. So these 2. So 1 loop, 2 loops. Now we're going to chain 2. 1, 2. Now you're going to yarn over and pull through all of these loops. So yarn over and pull through 4. So it's this one. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4. So you see how these cluster together? These are your 3 stitches plus the 1 on your loop or on your hook up here. These are the 4 stitches you pull through. Right. Chain 2. 1, 2. And now yarn over and pull through all 4 loops. So yarn over and pull through 1, 2, 3, 4. Chain 2. 1, 2. Yarn over and pull through 4. Chain 2. Yarn over, pull through the remaining 4 loops on your hook. There we go. So here's our second row. For this next row, since you have your little wave right here, your little flower, you just need to make a flower into this stitch right there. So just pay attention to your edges. That will tell you where to start. So if your flower's right here and you have that chain 2 right on the end to the right, you know you need to start your row with a little flower stitch. If, like this one, you have a little flower right here and then you have a chain space, you just chain 1 and you start your first little flower in that chain space. So go into that first stitch to the left of your flower and pull up a loop. And now you're going to go right on top of the flower. There is a stitch. It's kind of hidden and it's mostly visible in the back. But you're going to insert your hook into that stitch. So if I move it, you can see it right here. Insert your hook into that stitch and pull up a loop. There you go. And now insert your hook into the stitch to the right of your flower and pull up a loop. There we go. Skip the flower, go to the next chain space. Insert your hook into the stitch to the left of the flower. There you go. I made that chain a little tight. All right, so here's our flower. If you pull it up like this, you'll see the stitch right there. Insert your hook into that stitch and pull up a loop. And then you just keep repeating this little flower stitch until you get to the end of the row. So here we're at the end, and as you can see, this is a big chain space. So here's our flower, and this one's a large chain space. So here we will need to make another flower. So insert your hook, pull up the first loop, pull up our second loop, and then pull up our third loop. And once you've pulled up all 3 loops, the end right here is always going to be kind of different here than when you start the row. You always need to pull up that last loop of the row. So this one, it's going to be this big stitch you see right here. This is the last stitch of the row. You need to pull up a loop on this one. So it will be a little bit bigger than the other ones. So it will be quite noticeable when you hold the work right in front of your face. So go through both loops of that stitch. There we go. And you're just going to pull up a loop. And there you go. Your row is finished. Chain 2. So this is for our return pass. So we chain 1, chain 2, and now we just yarn over, and pull through 4 loops. Chain 2, yarn over, pull through 4, chain 2, yarn over, pull through 4, chain 2, yarn over, pull through 4, 2, 3, 4, and you're going to have this one last stitch left. You're going to chain 2 and then pull through that one, and then you just repeat the previous row. I did a total of 5 of these rows, so you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Oh, I didn't show it here on camera, so let me show you. 1, 2, 3, 4, and then 5. So I did 5 of these, and then I did a row of half double crochets at the very end. So finish one side. So you finish this side of the blanket, and then you're going to start on this side and do this side of your border. And then you're going to do the top and the bottom. So it doesn't matter. You can do the top of the bottom to the top. That one doesn't matter, but you have to do these last. So I'll work on those, and then I'll show you how to connect the top or bottom border to the edges here, because you just have to pull up the loops on this side. But I'll show you how to do that in a minute. So just pay attention on this stitch. The trick is to just pay attention to the edges. So here we have that chain 2 because we started that previous row with a little flower. So now this row, when we ended this row, we had to do the chain 2 to make space for it, because in this row we had our flower here. So you just have to pay attention to where the location of these are. It is really quite easy. Just kind of look at it and then you'll know what to do. So here we have a chain space, so our first stitch is going to be a flower, and flower, 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 until we get to the end. This row has the 2 loops that you pull up, and then you yarn over, pull through both loops. Alright, so all you have left to do is just do a repetition of the last 2 rows. So we'll repeat it one more time. You'll have 1, 2, 3. By the time you're done, you'll have 4 and 5. So you'll have all 5 little rows of your flowers. So repeat the last 2 rows one more time. Go to the right side and do the same. And then I'll see you when we finish that. So I'll show you how to do the top and bottom rows. And then we'll do our very last row of half double crochet to finish our blanket. So I worked on both sides of the border. So here's the left side, it's all done. I've got my 5 rows, and then here's the right side, also have the 5 rows. Now we have to work on the top part of the border, and then after you work on the bottom part. So you're just going to pull up a loop here in this very first stitch. So insert your hook into that top stitch, yarn over, and pull up a loop. Leave a nice long tail end of yarn when you're doing this. I didn't cut my thread because I'm just reusing this yarn later, so I didn't cut it. So just leave a nice long tail end of yarn and we'll weave that in at the end. But pull up a loop for every stitch of the row. So just cast on. And then once you get to these stitches, you're going to do the same. So here's one stitch. Here's the very next one. There we go. And now we've worked through this border part, and now you just work one stitch onto your loop for every stitch of the row. And that's it. For the rest of the rows, you're just going to repeat the same thing you did on this side of the border. But now, since you've got this edge right here, you're going to have some nice, clean, crisp corners that look like this. And that way you can join your side borders, your bottom border, and then you do the same thing when you work here on the bottom part. So once you finish this side, you just cut a nice long tail end of yarn, and then turn your work around and work another row, another few rows of ocean stitch on the bottom. So then you'll have all of your sides done. And then the only thing you have left to do is just another row of half double crochets along the edge, and that's it. Remember that when you're doing this last row of half double crochets, it's just 1 half double crochet for every stitch of the row, and then you do 3 on the corner. So 3 on this corner stitch, and then you just work all the way through. And that's it. So that's it, friends. That was our little duck blanket pattern for today. If you have any questions or comments, don't forget to leave them down in the comment section below. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, what are you waiting for? Subscribe. I post videos every Thursday. If you haven't stopped by the blog, go ahead and stop on by. I post all my patterns there for free. You can purchase PDF copies of all of the patterns if you are interested. If you'd like to see any more of my work, follow me on Instagram. Don't forget to like, comment, and share. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you all again next Thursday.